Welcome to Neural Nexus Podcast, where we explore the hottest topics shaping the world. Let's dive in.
All right, let's dive right into a listener request. This time, it's the life of Jimmy Carter. You know, the guy who really redefined what it means to be a leader even after leaving office. To guide us, we've got an episode from the Neural Nexus Podcast ready to unpack it all.
You know, what strikes me about Carter is that he really flips the script on what we think of as success. It's not just about holding powerful positions, right? He was all about using those roles to empower others throughout his whole life.
Exactly. And we always hear about presidents' legacies tied to their time in office, but with Carter, it seems like that was only the start. The podcast jumps back and forth between his early life and his later work, and I'm kind of curious to see how those connect.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. If we look closely, we can see how his upbringing in Plains, Georgia, kind of threads through his whole journey. Imagine young Jimmy Carter on the family farm, learning the value of hard work, community, and that connection to the land. Those experiences really laid the groundwork for his approach to leadership, emphasizing service, humility, and focusing on practical solutions.
Makes you wonder how those early years on the farm shaped his worldview. The podcast also mentions his time at the U.S. Naval Academy and his work with submarine technology. Kind of surprising for a peanut farmer's son, right?
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But even then, we see Carter willing to challenge himself and explore all these different fields. He was a nuclear tech specialist, working on cutting-edge submarine propulsion systems. I bet this background played a role in his later focus on energy policy and his understanding of complex systems.
So we've got a future president who's comfortable on a farm and on a nuclear sub. Then a big twist, his father passes away, and Carter leaves the Navy to run the family peanut farm. It's like this event totally redirected him.
Yeah, and that redirection led him to politics. He went from managing crops to running a campaign, winning the seat in the Georgia State Senate. And while he was in state politics, he was a vocal advocate for civil rights, challenging the status quo, pushing for equality during a really turbulent time in the South.
It's wild how seemingly unrelated events can have a ripple effect. From the Navy to peanut farming to state politics, not exactly your typical path to the presidency, is it?
You're telling me.
Yeah.
And yet, each step gave him these unique experiences and insights that shaped his leadership style. By the time the 1976 election came around, the nation was desperate for change and someone authentic. We'd been through Watergate, economic instability, a real loss of faith in the political establishment.
And then there's Jimmy Carter, the peanut farmer with a naval background, promising honesty and transparency. The podcast really highlights how his campaign resonated with voters who were yearning for something different, a leader who felt genuine and relatable.
Absolutely. That connection was key to his win. He campaigned on integrity, promising to restore trust in government and tackle the nation's problems head on. This resonated massively in the post-Watergate era, where faith in institutions was shattered.
So he wins and steps into the Oval Office, but what did he actually accomplish during his presidency? What are the standout moments we should know about?
His presidency had its ups and downs for sure, but the podcast highlights the Camp David Accords as a major win. That's the peace agreement between Israel and Egypt. Carter helped create in 1978.
Yeah, I vaguely remember that from history class, but honestly, the details are kind of fuzzy. Why was this such a big deal?
Picture two countries, right? Stuck in this seemingly endless conflict, decades of hostility and zero trust. Carter, through some seriously patient diplomacy and willingness to take risks, brings the leaders of Israel and Egypt together at Camp David. The result: a peace treaty that was a huge turning point in Middle Eastern history, eased tensions and set the stage for future talks.
Wow, to pull that off must have taken some serious skill and persistence. The podcast also mentions his focus on energy policy, especially pushing for renewable energy.
Absolutely. Carter was way ahead of his time on this. He saw the need to move away from fossil fuels and toward a more sustainable future. Get this, in 1979, he installed solar panels on the White House. A pretty bold move back then, right? And he also championed the creation of the Department of Energy, basically bringing all energy-related programs and research under one roof.
Solar panels on the White House. Seems pretty bold for the time. Did he get any pushback on those ideas?
Oh, tons. His energy policies were definitely met with resistance, especially from those connected to the fossil fuel industry. But Carter stuck to his guns. He knew short-term economic interests couldn't outweigh the long-term health of the planet. It's like he was laying the groundwork for the conversations we're having today about climate change and renewable energy.
Fascinating how some leaders are just ahead of the curve. But as the podcast points out, it's what happened after his presidency that really sets Carter apart. Almost like leaving office let him step into an even bigger role, you know?
For sure. His work with the Carter Center after his presidency is where his legacy really shines. Founded in 1982, the center is dedicated to human rights and alleviating suffering all over the world. They tackle all sorts of things: election monitoring, disease eradication, always focusing on practical, on-the-ground solutions.
And speaking of disease eradication, the podcast specifically mentions their work fighting guinea worm disease. I've got to admit, I've never even heard of that. What's the deal with that?
Imagine a parasitic worm that grows up to 3 feet long inside your body. Excruciating pain, disability, that's guinea worm disease, a horrific condition that used to affect millions in Africa and Asia. It spreads through contaminated water, and for centuries, there was no cure.
That's awful. How did the Carter Center even get involved with something like that?
They saw this neglected disease was devastating communities, trapping them in poverty and suffering. And Carter, with that trademark determination of his, decided to tackle it head on. The Carter Center, through a mix of public health stuff, community education, and tireless advocacy, has brought this disease to the brink of eradication.
That's amazing. From president to global health crusader, what a second act. And their work goes beyond just guinea worm right. They're also big on promoting democracy and fair elections.
Totally. The Carter Center has observed elections in over 100 countries, making sure they're free and fair. They train election observers, they monitor polling stations, they push for transparency and accountability. The goal: empower citizens and strengthen democracies, especially in places where democracy is a bit shaky.
So it's not just about watching elections, it's about creating real, lasting change and building stronger systems. It's crazy how Carter has managed to bridge these different worlds: politics, diplomacy, humanitarian work.
And he does it all with this unshakable commitment to human rights and dignity. His post-presidency work isn't about personal gain or political maneuvering. It's about making a tangible difference in the lives of others.
And people notice that dedication too. The podcast highlights that in 2002, he won the Nobel Peace Prize, a well-deserved recognition for a life spent making the world a better place.
You said it. The Nobel Prize recognized his decades of work, not just as president, but as a global citizen who really championed peace, democracy, and human dignity. It's proof that sustained effort, compassion, and believing in positive change can make a difference.
Okay, so we've got a former president eradicating diseases, promoting democracy, and winning Nobel Prizes. What else has he been up to since leaving office? The podcast mentions his involvement with Habitat for Humanity, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, even in his later years, Carter was still out there building homes for those in need. It's a powerful image. A former president, hammer in hand, working alongside volunteers to give families a roof over their heads. Really says something about his humility and dedication to service.
It's remarkable how he's stayed active and engaged in making a difference, even as he's gotten older. The podcast also talks about his longtime commitment to teaching Sunday school in his hometown.
For decades, he's taught Sunday school at the Maranatha Baptist Church in Plains, Georgia. Imagine a former president standing in front of a small congregation, sharing his faith and insights. It speaks to his deep belief in community, service, and forgiveness.
It's like all these different parts of his life: the farmer, the naval officer, the president, the humanitarian. They all come together in that image of him teaching Sunday school. It shows his multifaceted character and how committed he is to his values.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
It's not about separating the different parts of his life. It's about seeing how all his experiences are connected and how they've shaped how he sees the world. And in the end, it's about the lessons we can learn from his journey.
Okay, so we've explored his early life, his presidency, his incredible post-presidency work. But what does it all mean? What are the key takeaways from this deep dive into Jimmy Carter?
Phew. We've covered a lot of ground in our deep dive on Jimmy Carter, from peanut farms to nuclear submarines to the Oval Office and beyond. What a ride it really has been. As we wrap up, it's worth asking ourselves, what can we learn from this guy? What stood out to you most?
Honestly, his dedication to service, it's kind of mind-blowing. It wasn't just about holding powerful positions, right? It was about using those positions, his influence, to make a real difference in the world.
You nailed it. It's a constant throughout his whole life, from championing civil rights in Georgia to brokering peace in the Middle East to tackling global health crises with the Carter Center. He was always using his platform to fight for those who were often ignored or pushed aside.
It's like he saw leadership as a responsibility, a way to lift others up and create a more just and equal world. And he did it all with such quiet humility, never seeking the spotlight or bragging about his accomplishments.
His humility, it's something else. He lived modestly, even after leaving the White House, and stayed involved in his community in really down-to-earth ways.
Hmm.
Reminds us that true leadership isn't about ego or getting attention. It's about being authentic, having integrity, and genuinely wanting to serve something bigger than yourself.
And speaking of serving something bigger, I think there's a lesson here about resilience and not giving up. Carter faced so many challenges, political losses, health issues, but he never let go of his vision for a better world.
Oh, absolutely. His commitment to wiping out guinea worm disease is a perfect example. It was a long, tough fight, years of work and collaboration. But he and the Carter Center never wavered, and their efforts are close to completely eradicating this horrible disease.
It's inspiring to see how much dedication and refusing to quit can accomplish. And it's not just about global stuff, right? It's a lesson we can use in our own lives, our own struggles, and our own dreams.
100%. Carter's story shows us that we all have the power to make a difference, regardless of where we come from or what we've been through. It's about knowing what you stand for, finding your purpose, and then committing to making a positive impact around you.
Such a powerful message, especially these days. We're dealing with complex problems that need us to work together, to have compassion, and to believe things can get better.
You're right. And maybe by thinking about Jimmy Carter and everything he's done, we can find some inspiration and direction as we try to create a more just and equal future for ourselves.
To the listener who requested this deep dive, thank you for sending us on this journey. It's been a truly eye-opening experience.
I agree. And as you go about your day, here's something to think about. What seemingly small event in your own life might have put you on a completely different path? What choices, big or small, have shaped who you are today?
That's a great question to ponder, one that encourages us to reflect on our own lives and the paths we choose. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep striving to make the world a better place.